Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Shelly Hubbard, and I'm on the marketing team here at Center for Change. We're excited to have Danielle with us today. I'll turn the time over to her in just a moment, but before we begin with her, I just have a couple of housekeeping items. So first, in the handout section of the toolbar, there is a PowerPoint, as well as a copy of the post test that you're welcome to refer to throughout the webinar that will help you with your post test that you will need to take in order to get CE credit. Also throughout the webinar, if you have questions, feel free to submit those in the questions section of the toolbar. And at the end, we will try to get to a couple of those questions, or as many as we can, depending upon how much time we have. And then when the webinar ends, there will be an evaluation that pops up, and that's for us to continue to offer CE credit. So please take just a moment to fill that out. And then about an hour after the webinar ends, you will receive a separate email that will have a link to take the post test. And then after you pass that test, you will have an option to download a certificate for CE credit. So we're excited to have Danielle with us today. She's a dietitian at our Center for Change Boise location, and I will turn the time over to her and she can kind of introduce herself and we'll get going. So there we go.
Awesome. Whoops, thank you so much. Okay, let me switch. All right, Shelly, does that look about right?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining on your lunch break. I hope if you're anywhere where there's nice weather, you get to be outside watching this, because in Boise, Idaho, it's beautiful out today. So, okay, so the presentation title is Removing Weight Stigma from Healthcare, a pocket guide to changing the way we care. To tell you a little bit before I introduce myself how this presentation kind of came to fruition. Last year I did a webinar and a lot of the feedback was they enjoyed learning about health at every size and weight neutral care, but they wanted to have some hands-on tools to implement it into their practice, into their healthcare offices, and to kind of help them educate their colleagues and things like that. So this is what turned out. I hope you enjoy it and I hope you find it helpful. Okay, so some disclosure of potential conflicts of interest. As Shelly mentioned, I'm employed by Center for Change, and there wasn't anything else that I identified that would have been a conflict, except I'm biased in nature because I'm really passionate about this topic. This is what I do for a living. This is the world that I'm in. So that would be my only other potential conflict of interest going through this presentation. So a little bit about me. I always think it's nice to learn a little bit about who is presenting to you, a little bit about me personally. So I consider myself to be an anti-diet dietitian. I'm a yogi and a yoga instructor. I'm not currently teaching because COVID really put a hankering on the yoga facilities that are available out here in Boise. And I have my master's degree from Idaho State University. I've been working in this field, eating disorder field, specifically for 5 years and as a dietitian for about 7 years. Something interesting about me, I'm an Idaho native. Idaho is amazing. I'm sure many of you have heard, and that lots of people are coming here because it's just a great place to be. And my husband and I also keep bees. So we currently have 3 beehives in our backyard that we get to enjoy and harvest from once a year. My husband does more of the playing around with the boxes, and I get to enjoy watching them and help him harvest at the end of the year. So that's just a little bit about me. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm excited to be here. So I felt like it was important for my own personal disclaimer before starting the presentation is that I am a cisgendered, I consider myself to be a mid-sized white female who has not knowingly experienced direct discrimination in the healthcare that I have had the honor of being able to receive. I'm passionate about this because I have got to sit alongside many of my patients or clients and their experience in experiencing weight stigma in their healthcare as well as I have many loved ones who also have shared their experience. And I hope to be an ally in the healthcare community and aiding the catalyst to change. A lot of what I've created has come from those people's experiences. So I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there of to help you understand why I'm passionate about it, how I get my information, and besides research, how my personal experience has impacted my knowledge in this topic. Okay, so these are the objectives. I want you guys to be able to walk away to clearly identify 3 negative implications that weight stigma has on health, on all areas of health. I want you to be able to describe 3 ways that you can make your healthcare setting more inclusive, whether that's a medical office, a therapy office, a nursing facility, on ways that you can implement that are extremely easy. I also want you to be able to describe the difference between the weight inclusive and a weight normative approach, specifically in a healthcare setting. So with all the disclaimers, objectives, a little bit about me, we'll finally be able to start. And the beginning of my presentation, I want to share 2 videos. Some of you might recognize this person. She kind of became virally famous, I guess, through TikTok, and she was on the Today Show. And I've chatted with her, and she's given me permission to share and discuss her story. She's very open about it online. And so we'll start with the 2 videos of that. The second video overlaps a little bit with the first video, but just bear with me, and I hope you enjoy. Okay, I did really good that I didn't cry when I watched this video today. So I just thought this was a really powerful video, at least for me as I was watching it, and as I've gotten to follow her on social media about her experience. And unfortunately, Amanda's experience is not very uncommon, but I just felt like her videos are really raw, and having an experience right after it and being able to show her emotions that went along with her medical appointment. Luckily, Amanda is currently, she sought out a new doctor and is now currently living in remission from cancer. So that's very exciting news. But in her excitement of her news of living in remission, it shows, brings to light an important topic. So I wanted to distribute a couple of definitions of weight stigma that I found that I use when I'm educating people or when I talk about weight stigma. So NIDA describes it as a weight bias or discrimination based off of a person's weight. So this could be bullying, blaming, shaming, voicing concern about someone's health based off how they look, or any other type of stereotypes that I'm sure we all are very aware of that come along with people in larger bodies. And then another definition is negative social stereotypes and misconceptions affixing social identities to perceived excess body weight. And on the right-hand side, there's a little comic, which I have really tried really hard to find to give credit to whoever created this, and I haven't. So if you know who created this comic, please let me know. But I think it's over-exaggerated, but a great depiction of what white stigma might look like in the doctor's office. Hopefully no one's coming into a primary care with a piece of lumber through their abdominal wall, but I think it's a great depiction of what that might look like in a doctor's office. Okay, so some of the types of weight stigma that are most common and studied, these are the three most common. So we'll go through each one of these and I'll give you examples of what each type of bias could look like. Obviously, there's more ways that this could look like, but I felt like the ones I'll share with you are you've probably experienced or seen someone experiencing these. The first one is implicit bias. So this is attitudes or stereotypes that affect an individual's understanding and actions in an unconscious manner. So I feel like from what the experiences that I've had with clients or loved ones who've experienced weight stigma in a healthcare appointment is typically this type of bias. I hate to think that most providers are doing something with knowingly ill intent or knowingly trying to harm a patient. So this might be a bias of a belief that clients in larger bodies are generally non-compliant. In the example with Amanda, when the doctor immediately started asking her, well, do you eat a lot of greasy foods or fast food? I would say that's a great example of an implicit bias, that we have this unconscious stereotype of, well, people in larger bodies tend to not eat healthy, or they eat a lot of high calorie, high fat foods. So this would be an example of implicit bias. It might even come across in the tone. We might unconsciously have a more demeaning tone or a lecturing type tone than we might have with someone in a smaller body. This might come across as blaming someone's medical conditions based off their weight. This also might impact in a medical setting, different testings that you might offer people in a larger body, different types of referrals. So someone who's living in a larger body compared to someone in a smaller body, let's say they both present with knee pain, you might immediately with the smaller body say, okay, we're going to do cortisone shots, we're going to get you into physical therapy, we're going to get you an x-ray. And someone in a larger body, you might just say, well, you need to lose weight, right? So this is a type of a bias that we're changing the way we offer care based off body shape and size, when in fact, all those things that you recommended for the smaller bodied person might also be really effective for someone in a larger body. The next example of weight stigma is explicit bias, which I hope doesn't come up in healthcare, but we know that it does. It's intentional and conscious. So this type of bias is expressed as discrimination and prejudice against someone in a larger body. So an example of this might be, well, if you just lost weight, all your healthcare problems would go away. Or why aren't you losing weight? You aren't doing what I told you to do. If you just tried harder and ate better, you would be healthier, you'd feel better, your knee wouldn't hurt. Another example might be like, I feel disgusting when I gain weight. I would rather die than be in a larger body than be fat. So those are the two types of stigma that I would say come up in the medical office that a provider might express onto a patient. The next one is internalized weight bias, and this is what we worry about of how our actions as healthcare providers might influence and create stigma within our patients or clients. So internalized weight stigma is a measure of an individual's belief in stereotypes related to negative self-evaluations created by social norms and cultural beliefs. So this might come across as a person making self-deprecating jokes about their own weight. They might always say, oh, I can't be in the picture, you guys be the picture, you take the pictures. They might not pursue certain relationships or jobs based off their weight. They might engage in harming behaviors to lose weight because they feel like they deserve that, or they don't deserve to eat, or they can't do those things based off their body weight, shape, and size. They might disengage in things because they feel like they don't deserve it, or, oh, Becky deserves that promotion more than me, things like that. So that's how internalized weight stigma shows up, which is fueled by the implicit and explicit bias that might be present in the medical setting. So why is this important? Hopefully, I imagine if you're here already, you feel like this is an important topic, but these are just some bullet points of why I feel like this topic is important, and to give a little bit of context to these issues that you can use hopefully in your healthcare setting to educate staff members, colleagues, etc. The first one being a public health concern. We as a society continue to create public health programs, messages that focus on weight loss, when in many cases we're actually, everything that we're trying to promote, we're actually causing and creating the opposite effects of weight loss. So what we're seeing and what we know is that intentional, long-term, significant weight loss is not an effective health promoting practice, and it fails a lot of the time. And I think, you know, a 95% is a common one that I see, that 95% of people who attempt to lose weight either regain that weight or more weight after they're stopping doing that drastic behavior. And this is a problem because if we continue to create this message, or these lifestyle programs, or these different programs or drugs to promote weight loss, if we're showing that the efficacy of all those interventions isn't working, then we need to find something else that does work to promote health. These harmful messages and programs actually can cause a disengagement from health programs, the weight regain and regain. And again, like I said, it's an issue because we're creating the opposite of what we're intending. So at what point do we say, okay, as the public health systems, this isn't working, we need to have something new? The next one that I thought of was the social justice issue, right? So this continues to be what I believe to be one of the more socially acceptable ways to discriminate and oppress people. It limits people in larger body sizes from appropriate healthcare, education, changes their socioeconomic status. And again, if we continue to have low success rates and we continue to oppress this population, we're having the opposite effect with what most of us went into this field to do, which was to help people and help create a healthy population. It decreases the psychological, emotional, and physical consequences brought on by weight stigma. It's important because approaching from a weight neutral approach, it improves patient-centered care, right? So kind of the example of, you know, we're just kind of slapping weight loss on a lot of different health conditions. And when we remove that, and so we'll talk later in the presentation, there's just so much more that we're missing that we can't address through, well, you just need to lose weight. And it's an ethical concern. So I was lucky enough to work with Reagan Chastain. If you don't know her, she has a big presence on social media and in the social justice arena with being a fat advocate, especially in the healthcare community. So I worked with her and did a presentation consult just to get her feedback. And one of the points that she brought up was this ethical concern. And when we talk about ethics, it's determining right from wrong and doing no harm. And a weight-centric model and approach is harmful. We know it's harmful. Our patients come and tell us it's harmful. And so when people might say, well, it's not ethical to not promote weight loss, when we have all these studies supposedly that say that this isn't healthy. Well, we also have the other side of people saying, this is harmful to me. You know, it's creating maladaptive and disordered eating patterns and behaviors. It's causing people to disengage from healthcare. And to me, I'd say that's an ethical concern. I don't want to do harm to my patients and clients, and I work really hard to ensure that I do that at the lowest risk possible, right? So these are the top reasons why I feel like when hopefully you social justice warriors go out there and bring this back to your healthcare setting, that these are some of the points that we can be talking about and discussing with others to promote a weight neutral healthcare setting. So weight neutral language, which I know that we're really bound by, especially since BMI has been used as a diagnostic tool, that in insurance and in charting electronic medical records, underweight, overweight, normal weight, obese, morbid obesity, and all the other obesities up from that, I know that are in our charting system. So we have a lot of work, there's a lot of work to be done, but some vernacular that we can use that might be more weight neutral, especially when we're talking to colleagues, when we're talking to patients, could be things on the left-hand side. So a person with a higher or lower weight, person in a larger or smaller body, higher or lower end of the weight spectrum, and fat. Now, the caveat with that being, as I'm sure many of you know, is that it's a term that's kind of being taken back from the fat community to intended to no longer cause trauma, but a lot of people do have trauma associated with that word. So when you're working one-on-one with a client, you'll find out pretty quickly, I would say, if you create an environment of how they describe their body. I tend to use person in a higher or lower weight, seems to be a pretty neutral term to use. And also obesity, the term obesity is used in the clinical writing as kind of the norm, but I do see more academic writing moving towards a person who has obesity or a person who suffers from obesity, which I guess is in some way moving in the right direction, but I don't think we're quite there yet. So hopefully over time, we'll kind of see how does that language change, hopefully through people implementing this weight neutral approach more and more. So what do we know about a weight-centric approach? And a weight-centric approach is the approach we're living in now, right? That our weight kind of controls all. It's very weight focused. Weight is kind of at the center of a lot of health diagnoses, health treatment, health interventions. So the research amply supports that weight cycling is a huge factor when we're talking about weight-focused approach. Weight cycling is someone losing and gaining weight significantly over a period of time. Someone who in the news recently has come up quite a bit is Jessica Simpson, and bless her heart, she recently has lost weight again, and she said in an interview, I have lost and regained the same 100 pounds over 3 times in her lifetime. And that is a great example of weight cycling. And we know that it impacts metabolic health. It decreases self-efficacy when we're talking about health promoting behaviors. It may in turn result in a higher BMI, and a higher BMI isn't the problem. The problem is that we're focusing on weight loss. We're wanting a person to lose weight and have a lower BMI, yet when we implement this weight-centric approach, it's having the opposite intended effect. And we know that it impacts mortality rates. It impacts eating disorders, creates maladaptive eating disorder behaviors. It's not an effective way to create thinness or health, and yet this is at the paradigm of our healthcare system. It continues to divide provider-patient-client relationships. It lacks informed consent. So this also came from Regan Chastain when she's talking about, are we discussing the risks associated with something so unsuccessful? Do we talk about metabolic health? Do we talk about the psychological, emotional, social impacts that focusing on intentional weight loss has? And I would say from what I've experienced from my clients and loved ones who've been told to lose weight in the doctor's office, no, it's you need to lose weight. We are prescribing harmful behaviors in pursuit of thinness, and we're doing it despairingly, right? So if someone came in your office in a smaller body versus a larger body, we're saying to the larger body person, well, you need to be eating 1,200 calories a day, you need to be exercising more, drinking more water, you need to be very, very rigid and controlled, weigh everything you eat. When someone in a smaller body comes in and they say that same thing, we're like, oh my gosh, this is a problem, you shouldn't be doing that. And we're also simplifying obesity and weight, and that we're not looking at genetics, environment, socioeconomic status, and the social determinants that typically have more weight to control weight, right? So these are some of the physical consequences of weight stigma. So things that are going to have consequences on the physical health. So like I said, it discourages health promoting behaviors. We have a lot of research showing that people who experience weight stigma compared to those who don't have higher blood pressure levels, higher cortisol levels. They have higher C-reactive protein, which is a systemic inflammation in the body. That's the marker that we use. There's higher A1Cs associated with those who experience weight stigma. There's more likelihood of weight cycling, which we just talked about, some of those consequences. Again, people are using unhealthy behaviors in efforts for weight management. There's an increase in allostatic load, which is the overall stress, wear, and tear on the body. There's an overall avoidance of healthcare, increase in depressive symptoms, and one that when I was researching for this presentation, weight stigma by association. So not only is weight stigma affecting the direct person who's experiencing it, it's also affecting those around them. So I have a sister who lives in a larger body, and I saw how, our family tried to, and in our loving hearts, to protect her and saying, well, we want to do all these things so you don't get heavy, because this is how the world treats people in a larger body, and it's scary. And parents are stigmatized, and how did you let your child get this big? Why is your child this big? They're on the 95 percentile. They need to lose weight. So there's a lot of also emerging research that's showing that not only is it the child or someone else being stigmatized, but those who are directly around them are also receiving some of those same impacts, which I thought was, we think about it, but now we're showing research that some of these consequences are kind of spreading outside of who's directly experiencing that stigma. This is just a graph. If you're a visual learner and you like this, you can kind of pull this research if you're going to be taking this presentation to someone. Is just a kind of a breakdown of what does weight stigma, those who are experiencing, what are the consequences? And we've kind of already talked about those, and there's a lot of consequences here. And I also just want to reiterate for the weight gain piece, weight gain and higher weights are not inherently bad, but what is, I guess, the focus here is that it's the opposite effect, again, of what we're trying to do when we work from a weight-centric approach, which is where the problem is. So the research has measured, what are some of the effects, immediate and long-term effect of a person in the office experiencing weight stigma. So the immediate effect is that research shows, and I'm sorry that most of this research is pulled from medical doctors and dietitians, so I'm not trying to poo-poo on them, but that's where the research, a lot of this research is coming from. So it shows that medical providers spend less time with a patient who lives in a larger body. Again, medical doctors or medical professionals believe, they have that inherent belief they'll be less compliant. They're in a larger body, they won't lose weight. They won't do anything I'm telling them to do. Why should I tell them, give them more education, because I know they're not going to do it. There's increased negative experiences on both parties, so by the provider and the patient. And for the patient specifically who's experiencing the stigma, it impairs their functioning and cognitive ability to communicate effectively. So I am someone who chooses not to be weighed at the doctor, and as someone who hasn't experienced weight stigma, I still get nervous, right, of having to defend myself and communicate why I'm choosing to approach my healthcare that way. And for someone who has a lot of trauma in the medical office, the medical or healthcare setting, it changes the way they can advocate for themselves. Someone who's been, shamed to lose weight by their provider, or a variety of providers, walks into an office, they might not be able to communicate. They might feel embarrassed to ask questions. They might not say, oh, that doesn't make sense. Can you explain that to me again? So that's some of the immediate effects that happen right in the office. The long-term effects that are measured, there's high levels of stress, which we know impact health. Patients might wait longer to seek out healthcare, which is why we might see higher blood pressure, higher A1Cs, higher cortisol levels, is because they're waiting, prolonging of how often they go to the healthcare office. They might, again, disengage from healthcare promoting or health promoting behaviors altogether. They're more likely to seek out a weight-focused treatment, which we already looked at some of those consequences. And again, the delayed diagnosis and treatment if they're avoiding the healthcare setting. So I just wanted to provide, for those who aren't familiar, which I imagine most of you on this call are familiar with Health at Every Size, just because I think this is one of an effective way to show if you're trying to implement some of these protocols in your office or in your organization. This is a structured way, and I think people like structure, they like principles, they like standards and policies, and I think this is a good way to get the conversation started in adopting principle or policies or changing how we do things. So I won't go into these too much in detail. So ASDA, Association for Size Diversity and Health, currently owns a registered trademark on Health at Every Size. And so these principles are pulled directly from their website. Something I learned recently is that these 5 principles were last updated in 2013, and the board of ASDA is reviewing and revising these principles within 2022 to 2023. So these potentially could change to reflect more of the beliefs and standards that ASDA has. But currently, these are the principles that Health at Every Size markets. So weight inclusivity, so respecting body diversity, body weight and shape and size diversity. The second principle is health enhancement. So supporting policies to improve access to care and paying attention to all those other social determinants of health that we know impact someone's health. Eating for well-being, which I would say kind of in a nutshell is like intuitive eating, individualized, flexible eating patterns that are not based off externally regulated eating patterns for weight control. Offering respectful care, so acknowledging our own biases, work to end discrimination and oppression in the healthcare set or in any setting, and life-enhancing movement. So supporting physical activity to the amount that someone chooses, regardless of their age, their body weight, shape, and size, their ability, and for what they enjoy, right? We know that the movement of any kind has benefits, and it doesn't just have to be in that narrow mind that I think a lot of people still, when they hear the word exercise, think it has to look. So if you want more information, ASDA has a plethora of resources. They have pre-prepared presentations, they have printable resources, research, basically everything you'd need is available on their website. So why it's important to move away from BMI. This is a tough one because like I mentioned, we're kind of bound by insurance. I mean, and even in eating disorder care, we still use BMI for insurance. We still track weights and things like that. So this, I think it's important to educate people in the office of why BMI is not really an effective tool. You know, it was created so long ago. It wasn't meant to be a diagnostic tool. It doesn't take into account for race, ethnicity, body diversity, and yet we're still using it as a diagnostic tool, which makes it really challenging. So I know that that's a big ask to really challenge the policies of why we're using BMI still in the medical setting as one of the most important, I would say, tools of health. But I think it is important to challenge that and, you know, asking, you know, why are we using this? Is there a policy in our healthcare system that we can change on an independent level? Because it's just really not an effective tool. But we do use it because it's cheap, it's easy, it's easily accessible. We like to categorize things, and unfortunately, individual health is really hard to fit into a box. But we're really trying to do that with the BMI piece and using it as a diagnostic tool. Okay, so in a medical setting, how can we be more weight inclusive? I tried really hard to find research on, you know, are there programs that hospitals are using where they're using health at every size or a weight neutral approach? And the research is really limited. And the research that we do have says that, yeah, we want that. And this is how we think we could do it, but it's really not being implemented on a level that's being researched. So I kind of maybe bit off more than I can chew when I created this presentation and said that I would do it because the research is lacking. And, you know, we want to see, like, you know, if we take BMI out of this clinical setting, how does that affect it? Can we provide care effectively? That research just really isn't here. So these are things that we've implemented in our practice here in Boise at Center for Change to be more weight neutral. These are things that I've collected from patients on what would make them feel less stigmatized when they're going into the medical office. So, and these are some things that I would say are pretty cheap and easy, just kind of like BMI, that you can implement into a healthcare setting, whether it be a therapeutic office, whether it be a school nurse or school counselor. These are some things that might offer a more weight neutral setting. So the first one being honoring if the patient declines to be weighed. I don't get weighed in the doctor's office, and sometimes no one says anything. Sometimes the provider or the nurse says, well, your insurance won't pay if you don't have a weighed in, which is not true. You know, I can decline to be weighed if I want to, unless it's directly impacting my appointment. It's not essentially necessary. Honoring blind weights if requested. I know this is challenging with now that patients have access to online medical portals, and when we print out discharge paperwork, that weight might be on there. So just being really mindful and trying to, the best we can, whiting it out if we know that, if the person's requesting a blind weight, or let them know, hey, your weight is printed on this, can I remove it for you? Just to let you know it's going to be on there. And obviously we can't catch all of them, but if we're, you know, more aware and have more knowledge in the medical setting, we might be able to do a better job. Having equipment for a wide variety of sizes on hand. So, having larger gowns, having blood pressure cuffs that fit, have chairs and seating. Anything that's size dependent should be readily available. I love these chairs because then you don't have to worry about it at all. Everyone can sit on it. You don't have to have smaller chairs and larger chairs. I think just assuming that we have equipment that fits everybody who walks into our office and not having that not be the norm. So if you have a blood pressure machine, having a larger cuff readily available, not saying, oh, I have to go downstairs and get it, we need a larger cuff, having these things available in the office, really, spending the money on having these things in the office so that, a person isn't seeing that like, oh, I'm different, I need something different. What systemic policies can be reevaluated? What are we doing in our current practice that could be changed? One thing that came to my mind is when I was in my internship, when a patient who came into the hospital in an acute care setting, when their BMI triggered over 40, the dietitian was required to go in and kind of lecture them and give them education about, you need to be eating more whole grains, your BMI is too high, you need to be losing weight. And even as an intern, when I didn't even fully know and understand health at every size or weight neutrality, I didn't feel right about that. And I just remember looking at this one woman and, she was there for a COPD exacerbation and was not doing well. And it didn't feel right to be in there. Is this relevant? And I didn't feel like it was relevant. So can that policy be changed? And I know it's challenging, but I think it's great when we ask questions on a systemic level of what can be changed. Having inclusive decor, so whether it's in a gym setting, a yoga studio, a healthcare facility, making sure that there's representation on the walls of age, gender, ethnicity, race, body shape and size, of abilities, right? These should all be represented in the healthcare setting. What type of magazines and reading material are out? Do you have weight loss pamphlets littering your waiting room? Can we have more things? Can we have, heart health nutrition pamphlets that aren't focusing on weight? So these are just some of the things that I thought were potentially easy to implement in a healthcare setting, and some of the things that I thought about when I was looking through the research that is available about implementing weight neutral care. This is just for your use. Kind of a poster size example of some of the more recent research on how weight stigma impacts people in the medical care. And this one, the medical suggestion, women's suggestions, how to reduce weight stigma in prenatal clinical settings, was a really great research study that took 9 women and they kind of did a qualitative study and asked them, when you're experiencing weight stigma, what do you want your provider to do instead? And they gave some great resources, because I think we're going to learn best from our patients, from our clients, from people who've actually experienced stigma in our offices. So I wanted to do a case study just to kind of, I think a lot of people might feel intimidated, or they don't know how to implement it, or they have this idea of what a weight neutral conversation might look like with a patient. So this is more of a clinical setting to use, but you can kind of, based on where you work and what you do for a living, can kind of plug in your own case study here as we go through this. So this is someone who I might see in my office. She's a 35-year-old female, BMI of 32.2, again, using BMI. She works nights as a nurse. She has a family history of type 2 diabetes. She struggles financially. She relies a lot on convenience and prepackaged food based off of her job, based off of her ability to cook, has anxiety and depression, has a lot of knee pain that prevents additional movement outside of her being on her feet all night. Again, struggles to eat during her shift. She has binge type eating behaviors when she comes home, and she has a recent A1C diagnosis of 6.1, and the CDC standards is 6.5 would get you a type 2 diabetes diagnosis. So this is an example of how you might be able to change the conversation. So the patient comes in, my A1C is high, I have prediabetes, and the doctor told me that I need to lose weight, or I'm gonna give myself type 2 diabetes. I hear that a lot. A weight neutral approach might be, I'm hearing that you're concerned about your A1C lab values, and let's go over what that means for you. And a lot of times the patients will be, I know I'm eating too much sugar, I'm overweight, that's why I'm gonna get diabetes. And this is how a weight neutral approach might respond to a patient like this. I can understand why you have that belief, but there's definitely ways we can address your elevated blood sugar levels without focusing on your weight. Elevated blood sugars can happen in people of all body sizes, independent of weight. And part of my approach as a healthcare practitioner is from a weight inclusive and non-diet lens. So there's many health promoting behaviors we can work on that are independent of focusing on your weight, such as intuitive eating, meal timing, meal composition, exercise, stress management, etc. So none of that is discussing weight. And when I was thinking about this patient, I came up with, just a handful of things that we could talk about, that I could recommend or refer out to, that have nothing to do with this person's weight. So stress management, movement, physical therapy, normalizing the use of medication as appropriate, especially with a chronic illness that runs in her family, making sure they're being treated for their mental health, meds, therapy, talking about cooking self-efficacy, access to foods, confidence and knowledge and nutrition, making sure that lab work, what is their labs looking like, their living situation, where do they live, who do they live with, talking about how different macronutrients affect blood sugar, family history. I mean, I could go on and on. These just came off when I just did this page really fast. But there could be a plethora of other things that you could talk about in a wide variety of healthcare settings, from a therapist, a nurse, a doctor, a nurse practitioner, a physical therapist, right? So I thought that it's important to look at, like, what can we talk about other than weight? And in fact, I think these things are a lot more important to talk about than weight. So these are some of the barriers to implementing a weight neutral approach, besides, lack of, I would say, challenging, and the research of how would we implement this in a systemic system that's as large as our healthcare system. There's a lot of misconceptions of what a weight neutral approach would look like, would or could look like. There's limited research and funding on systemic implementation, as I mentioned before. Weight and BMI, regardless of it's a weight neutral research study or a study about eating disorders or weight stigma, BMI is still used. And in fact, in many things, it's used as a proxy to measure health outcomes. So even when we're looking at intuitive eating and all those great things that we want to implement, they're saying, like, look, their weight stayed the same, or they lost weight as a result. Well, we're still using weight loss, weight changes as a proxy to measure those health outcomes. Weight bias is more pervasive and socially acceptable. So some people still have really, really strong biases. People continue to simplify obesity. Health education, I know I can speak from the dietetic standpoint, remains very, very weight centric. I don't know how that's going to change, except for us, becoming aware and doing our own work. And it takes us undoing everything we know. I had a lot of bias. I mean, you go into dietetics, I wanted to help people stay thin. I wanted to help myself stay thin. And to get to where I'm at now took a lot of undoing. It challenges everything I know. It continues to challenge me daily. And how do I have conversations with other providers who still practice from a weight-centric approach that I don't agree with? So there's a lot of barriers. So it is up to us. It's not our patient's responsibility to, continue to advocate, but it's up to us as the healthcare professionals to really change the way healthcare works. It's up to us to do our own work, challenge our own biases. We all have them, especially working in healthcare. I mean, that's just the way that it's been, and hopefully we can do something different and do something better. It's up to us to challenge the ethics behind what we're prescribing to people, how we're offering, referring care. And what I learned with this is just the beginning. This doesn't even begin to scratch the surface of how we're going to change something that's so big and systemic and that's been oppressive for so long. And this quote came from the study that's listed on the right, that awareness alone will not solve this issue. I think it's a beginning, but this is so much bigger than us, but it does require us to become aware and to have these conversations with our colleagues, with ourselves, with our partners, with our kids, of how are we going to change the healthcare system to a more weight neutral approach. So I wanted to offer some resources. Obviously, Intuitive Eating is on here, Anti-Diet by Christy Harrison. Sonia Renee Taylor has a great book, The Body is Not an Apology, and it has a workbook with it as well. Sick Enough by Dr. Gaudiani is a great one from a really clinical perspective. Unapologetic Eating. Aubrey Gordon has a great book, What They Don't Talk About When We Talk About Fat. And the Non-Diet Approach Guidebook for Dietitians. This one's obviously specific for dietitians, but it could be helpful for any healthcare practitioner because it talks about how can you have an appointment using a non-diet or a weight neutral approach. So it gives great questions, great assessments, and great tools for an appointment that could thus be changed to a different healthcare profession. Some great video resources. Kind of like, I think videos are really powerful, especially when they come from the eyes of who's experiencing this. I think it's important because they deserve to have a voice and a seat at the table. And unfortunately, many times it's not actually them, those who've experienced it, coming to the table and talking amongst colleagues. So again, Sonia Renee Taylor has a great TED Talk video. The Student Body documentary, I highly recommend. When we talk about change, I mean, this girl is just on fire with how she was changing and how much effort it took to change in her school and school district. So it's about her experience removing the BMI mandates and report cards in her school district in Ohio. So something that might seem so small and all the work that went into it and how much time and effort and energy it does to change this one thing was really powerful, and I think it's a great documentary. And then Virgie Tovar, Lose Weight Not Hate, has a great TED Talk. She has great body image exploration journals, great information and resources. She does a lot of presentations, so she's also another great resource if this is something that you're interested in implementing. And then I love podcasts. I think podcasts are a great way to help colleagues or whoever kind of understand a weight neutral approach, because they can kind of do it in the privacy of their own car or on their own walk. Maintenance Phase is by far my favorite podcast. It does have a lot of explicit language, so if that's not your cup of tea or you know someone who's not that cup of tea, that might not be for them. But these are some other podcasts that I highly recommend without reservation. Sounds Like a Cult is more of a fun one to talk about how culty healthcare trends can be. So that was the end of my presentation, and I finished a little early. I was really trying to power through my information, and I'm a fast talker as it is, but I love to connect with people. My email is here for those who want it, and I'm also on Instagram at Gently Nourished. I love connecting and sharing with individuals, so if you have any questions or if you have any great ideas that you have and you want to share, I love to hear them. So that is all.
Great, thank you, Danielle. I will take the screen back, maybe. Okay, thank you. This is such an important topic and you're a great presenter on it. So, all right, so can you see you can see my screen now?
Yeah, I think so. Okay. Yes. See me.
Okay. So at the beginning, when you were showing the 2 TikTok videos, there were some people who didn't hear them, or it was kind of muffled. So I don't know if you can either sum that up a little bit or maybe tell us who that the girl's name or where they can find more information on to watch those videos.
Yeah, dang it, this is my first time embedding a video in a presentation. I was really hoping everyone could hear it. But essentially, if you type in, I think her name was on the little TikTok video. Her name is Amanda, and on her TikTok and Instagram is Manda Paints, so M-A-N-D-A Paints. And essentially, she was having digestive issues, wasn't eating growing up, and she went to a doctor's office, and when she said that she wasn't able to eat anything, he said that maybe that's not such a bad thing. So implying that, like, well, you're fat, it's not bad if you're not eating it and losing weight anyway. And she ended up getting a second opinion and had stage 3 colon cancer. So she was just sharing her story of her experience of bias in the office and how life-threatening it potentially could be. I mean, pancreatic, or I think it's pancreatic or colon cancer, is definitely nothing to play around with, especially at a late stage or any stage really. But that's what it was. And she was on the Today Show last year. I bet if you type that in, her TikTok went viral, which is how she ended up on the Today Show. So it's a great video.
Okay, thank you. So we do have a couple of questions. First one from Leah. And this is in regards to the case study that you shared. It would seem like part of this case study would be finding out if the weight issue or concern is the patient's or what she is saying based on what her healthcare provider told her. Would you ask the patient what her personal goals are?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's very true. I think, especially if they have that own bias, right, that internalized weight stigma, the doctor might not even have mentioned weight, but based off what the stigma with diabetes and weight is, the client most certainly could come in with that. And I would ask them what their personal goals. I just kind of made the assumption that the doctor told them to lose weight and they were coming in wanting to lose weight to help their diabetes. But for sure, asking them what their personal goal is. I think that's important in any setting and any session for sure.
Thank you. The next question is from Mary, and she says, not sure how we might move away from weight-centered approach when the DSM-5 for anorexia is based on BMI. So
Yeah,
I guess
absolutely.
question, could you address that?
I mean, I don't know how to change that either. I think we're moving in the right direction. I'm actually doing a presentation next week on atypical anorexia, which is anorexia without the BMI attached to it. And you're right. I mean, the diagnostic criteria, what we're using in hospitals, I mean, it all is very weight centric. And I wish that there was more research on how do we move away from that, who's doing it. But yeah, you're right that, the DSM and eating disorder approach is bias in itself. So that's a great point. I answer.
And then Alicia says, do you know of any federal or state legislation advocacy groups for weight discrimination?
I don't, but a good resource. So Jessica Setnick, she runs IFED, which is International Federation for Eating Disorder Dietitians. And she might know because she does a lot of like public policy stuff. And so that might be a person. And she's on Instagram at, I forget her name, but if you type in Jessica Setnick, she's pretty out there in the world and she might be a great resource.
Okay, thank you. There's many comments that are saying you gave a great presentation, so thank you.
Thank you.
So let's see, there are a couple more questions. Let me see if I can pull them up. So this is from Chelsea. Any ideas or resources for Hayes pediatricians? She works in a pediatric office as a dietitian, and she's trying to slowly bring them around to the Hayes view, but it's hard when everything from AAP is so weight focused. So any resources?
That's a tough one. And when I work with adolescents, I mean, if a kiddo has been at the 95% percentile of their weight from birth to age 6, then it's most likely they're going to stay there. And I would talk to the pediatrician about the appropriateness of restricting calories or trying to manage weight when that's such an important developmental area. There's a new book out called How to Raise Intuitive Eaters that I think is helpful. So you could show research on, how an intuitive eating approach helps build healthy health promoting behaviors, which is really what we want. And how, I don't think it's appropriate at all to start talking about controlling weight in a pediatric setting. So you could talk about and kind of defend of why you don't think that's appropriate. And here's something that we can do to replace that. So you can use a lot of these resources that I gave you now. And I think there is some research with children and weight stigma and like intuitive eating behaviors that you could find online as well.
Okay, great. Several people, after you said you were giving a presentation next week on atypical anorexia, they wanted to know more about that. Do you have details, or can anybody attend that, or who are you doing that presentation for?
I don't know. I'm doing it for an insurance company. I don't know if it's like open to the public or not, but I don't know how to say this. It's through Stigma insurance, and I think they post all their webinars online after because they available to people who have their insurance. So if you Google that in a couple weeks, it might come up. And they probably have other really good topics too.
Okay, yeah, and we'll get that information from you, and if you guys want to watch our social media accounts, we will post that so you guys can join that webinar as well if you're interested. So thank you so much again, Danielle, you did awesome. Just a few reminders that as soon as we close this webinar, there will be a pop-up screen, just a couple of questions about our CE credentials so that we can continue to offer CEs. And then in about an hour, you'll receive an email that has a link to the post test so that you can take that test and then download a certificate for CE credit. So thank you for joining us today. We hope you can join us again soon and hope all of you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Bye.